In the previous video, we talked about the difference between USB and XLR microphones and which ones are better for podcast recording or recording in general. If you decided to go for an XLR microphone, then the next step would be to choose something you can actually record your show with. Before we get into the actual examples of microphones that you can buy, which is going to be our next video, let's talk about the different types of microphones that are out there. If you're not already a subscriber, make sure to subscribe, especially if you're interested in all of this stuff. Okay, there are three main types of microphones. You can even say two, because the third one is kind of a subcategory, and since those mics are somewhat specific, we usually classify them as a separate group. We have the dynamic microphones or the moving coil microphones, and then the condenser microphones, which are also referred to as capacitor mics, and then the ribbon microphones. Ribbon microphones are dynamic microphones, but they are really fragile, and they're the first microphones that were ever built, so they are mostly used in recording studios to get that vintage analog sound, and you wouldn't bump into them in your everyday life. So don't worry about those.
Look right here.
Now let's talk about the difference between condenser and dynamic microphones and which ones should you go for when doing a podcast. Dynamic mics are mostly used for live shows because they're sturdy and robust and they're more resistant to water. This doesn't mean that they're waterproof, it just means that it's tougher for them to break because of moisture. Also, they don't require external power to work. But because of all of this, their frequency response is somewhat limited, meaning you don't get all of the sonic information that you would with a condenser, especially in the high frequencies. On the other hand, condenser microphones are much more fragile, much more sensitive, and they pick up more details, including the background sounds. While dynamic microphones aren't really that sensitive. They mostly pick up only what's in front of them. That's why condensers are mostly used in recording studios where you have access to an acoustically treated silent room and there's not much ambience or reflections you need to worry about. One big difference is that the condenser microphones require external power to work. And that's something that's called the phantom power. The phantom power is basically just 48 volts supplied to the microphone in order for it to work. That's why on mixers and audio interfaces you have a 48 volt button that indicates the phantom power. Make sure you supply phantom power only to condenser microphones. Dynamic microphones can take it, but don't do that unless you absolutely have to. However, if you supply phantom power to a ribbon microphone, you will break it for sure, so that's something to keep track of. Also, there are two types of condenser microphones, small diaphragm, which we like to refer to them as a pencil mic, and the large diaphragm. The large diaphragm microphones are the ones you usually see in TV shows when somebody is recording in a studio. Small diaphragm condenser microphones are really good for picking up transients, so they work really well as drum overheads. However, for vocal recording, they aren't really that good. So if you want a condenser microphone for vocal recording, then definitely go for a large diaphragm condenser microphone. Now, with everything I've said, you could argue that the condenser microphones are better because they generally pick up more sonic information. But that doesn't really mean anything if you're in a bad recording space. So it all depends on your environment and what are you trying to record. In 99% of the cases, for podcasting and podcast recording, I would definitely recommend going for a dynamic microphone, unless you have access to an acoustically treated recording space, which I'm sure most of us don't. Now remember, these are all tips and guidelines. Either way you choose, you can't go wrong. All of those mics sound good and they have a specific use in audio production. Finally, let's check out this quick sample that I recorded that showcases the difference between a condenser and a dynamic microphone, so you can actually hear what's going on. I'd suggest listening through headphones or studio monitors if you have access to those. Let's test the sonic difference between a dynamic and a condenser microphone. I've set them right next to each other, so the mic positioning and all the other factors are the same. I also used the signal generator to set up the gain, so the volume should be equal as well. I left my windows open on purpose so you can hear the amount of ambience noise each mic picks up. You can also hear the washing machine in the background. The mics we are using are MXL770 condenser microphone and Mackie EM89D dynamic microphone, I chose those two because they are in the similar price range and can be considered lower budget microphones that you can pick up for podcasting or your home studio. There's no EQ, compression, or any other effects added to the signal chain. Which one do you like more? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you share the video. If you're interested in hearing what are my favorite microphones when it comes to podcasting, check out our next video.